Since we are all having a lot more time on our hands, a lot of us are watching more movies, myself included. So I decided to recommend some weird movies to watch while in self-isolation. Canadian body horror legend David Cronenberg started off his career directing not one, but two movies about epidemics with an emphasis on sexuality. The first of these is Shivers, aka The Parasite Murders, aka They Came From Within, a movie about a mad, perverted scientist that creates a sexually transmitted parasite that will cause its host to become a nymphomaniac, basically resulting in an outbreak of rapists, leading to a giant orgy in a Montreal apartment complex. Yep. While its themes about repressed sexuality and its role in civilization are definitely not subtle, it's a lot of sleazy, queasy, low-budget horror fun. There's some really cool effects in here, and the implication that these large worm things are transmitted via sex will definitely send, well, shivers down your spine. Given that this movie is basically a boatload of rape, it gets legitimately disturbing at points, and one scene in particular will forever haunt me. The film caused Cronenberg to get kicked out by his landlord due to a morality clause in his lease. Definitely one to watch with the whole family. Of course, Cronenberg was not done exploring sex or outbreaks with this movie, as his next movie follows a similar plot. If Shivers was a zombie movie, then Rabid is a vampire movie, with a twist. After a doctor tries an experimental skin graft procedure on a young girl who was in a motorcycle accident, she develops an armpit vagina with a penis stinger that feeds on people's blood, spreading a new form of rabies. Yep, Cronenberg's twisted mind never ceases to amaze me. The lead star of this movie was a well-known porn star who was looking for a more mainstream role. Mainstream. She actually does a pretty damn good job here too. While this movie isn't as memorable or disturbing as Shivers, it's a better made movie and does an effective job at showing a legitimate outbreak with a larger scope, complete with hazmat wearing soldiers patrolling the streets, an image that I really hope our reality does not come to. Speaking of sexual transmission, It Follows is a great indie horror movie that also explores these themes. It doesn't feature a virus or disease outbreak, but is rather about a sexually transmitted curse that manifests itself as a figure that constantly follows the last person it is passed on to. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but it's definitely a well-made, effective, modern indie horror movie, and I felt the need to recommend it in this video. While the next movie that I'm going to be talking about does deal with the outbreak of a real disease, don't go looking at it for any realism. Ebola syndrome is one of the sickest, most perverted, and disgusting movies to come out of the Hong Kong category-free classification, but it is also one of the funniest. This movie is a wild ride that basically just inserts taboo after taboo with the sole purpose of shocking its audience. But unlike something like a Siberian film, it doesn't take itself seriously and has a bit of fun with it. That doesn't mean that isn't disturbing, as it does contain some rather legitimately upsetting scenes of rape and murder, but it does provide a certain sense of pitch black dark humor. In the first 5 minutes of the movie, the protagonist is caught sleeping with his boss's wife. His boss beats him up and orders his wife to piss on him. He manages to fight back, however, killing his boss and wife and nearly setting their child, who witnessed the whole thing, on fire. He then escapes to South Africa, where he works in a restaurant that decides to go buy meat from a tribe suffering from an Ebola outbreak because it's cheaper. He then comes upon a woman dying from Ebola and decides to rape her as she dies in order to not waste the opportunity. Yep, this guy is definitely a model human being. He gets Ebola in the process but recovers, becoming a carrier and starting an outbreak. The whole Ebola side of the plot is put aside until the end of the movie in order to show some more of this character's nasty misadventures. You never know where the movie is really going, and the whole thing is basically one huge mess of rape, murder, and bodily fluids. Once again, highly recommended viewing for the whole family. Some other classic movies with these themes that I would recommend if you haven't seen them already are the original George Romero zombie movies, especially Dawn of the Dead, Peter Jackson's Dead Alive for a fantastic zombie horror comedy,
I kick ass for the Lord!
the Wreck movies, which are very intense, Blindness, and Antiviral, which I talked about briefly in my 31 Days of Horror video. Since most of us are all self-isolating and only going out when necessary, it's easy to empathize with characters who go insane while isolated in one location. The theme of isolation is very common in a lot of weird art house and horror movies. The premise of being isolated in mainly one setting is so simple and can be used effectively to explore many themes. Roman Polanski's Apartment trilogy is an amazing example of this. The trilogy consists of 3 movies that share the common theme of people feeling trapped and isolated in their apartments. They don't connect narratively in any way, so you can watch them in any order. I know some people may boycott his films due to him being a vile person in real life, but if you can separate the art from the artist, then I would highly recommend these 3 films. The first film in the trilogy, which I feel most closely relates to how a lot of us are feeling now, is Repulsion. Shot in beautiful black and white, and starring legendary French actress Catherine Deneuve, it's about a young girl who is afraid of men and sex and basically isolates herself in her apartment and goes crazy. She starts to hallucinate that the apartment is falling apart around her and that men are coming to rape her. Like I said, very reminiscent of how a lot of us are feeling right now. Okay, maybe not the fear of men part, but the feeling of being trapped in a house that doesn't feel safe anymore, and the idea of the other invading, in our case, coronavirus infected people, definitely makes this film resonate at this time. While Repulsion is a great film to watch if you are isolating alone, the second movie in the trilogy, Rosemary's Baby, is great for you if you're isolating with your significant other who is gaslighting you. There is not much I could say about this movie that hasn't been said before. If you haven't seen it already, I would highly recommend it. Like I mentioned, a lot of it is about controlling relationships, coupled with the fears of childbirth and becoming a mother, or at least an interpretation of those fears from a male perspective, given that both the author of the novel and the director of the movie are men, but I digress. The third film in the Apartment trilogy is The Tenant. If this movie wasn't made before Polanski's exile, I would have thought this to have been autobiographical, as it stars Polanski himself as a man who moves into an apartment building who becomes convinced that the other tenants are plotting to kill him. While it's my least favorite in the trilogy, it's still a very strange and engaging psychological thriller that I would recommend just as much as the previous films. Another film which deals with going mad in isolation is one that I've already talked about once before on this channel and will be talking about once again. That film is The Lighthouse. If you are stuck self-isolating with a roommate who is older than you and is getting on your nerves and you don't like your cooking, then this is the perfect film for you. How long have we been in this quarantine anyways? Another film that I already talked about on this channel that, like Rosemary's Baby, deals with being isolated with a controlling spouse is Mother. The film is also very similar to Repulsion in that the house is also a character that constantly gets invaded and beat up. The thing that's great about this movie is that you can walk away with a different interpretation each time and project your own feelings upon it in a cathartic way. It's certainly not for everyone, but I am recommending weird movies here, so if you've made it this far in the video, check it out and check out my review of it too. Now here's another situation for you. You go to a fancy dinner party with a bunch of your rich friends and uh-oh, quarantine! The country goes into lockdown and you're stuck there. Okay, maybe not a likely scenario, but goddammit, I just need an excuse to recommend this movie. The Exterminating Angel is a film directed by the granddaddy of surrealism, Luis Buñuel, and it's one of my favorites from him. The plot is basically a bunch of rich assholes discover that for some inexplicable reason, they cannot leave the room in which they are having a party. This absurd situation causes them to all get on each other's nerves. In true Buñuel fashion, this movie deconstructs and criticizes the bourgeois way of life. Everyone starts panicking and blaming one another, and it just dissolves into chaos. It's very funny and entertaining, and I would highly recommend it. Finally, a lot of us, myself included, found ourselves isolating with our family. I got some suggestions here too. One film which I talked about before on this channel about a family isolating together during an apocalypse is Final Flesh. Basically, this film consists of 4 short productions by porn studios which were sent a bizarre, absurdist script to act out. It's extremely funny to see these actors try to create something sexy out of the weird material they have to work with, and their terrible acting and their sincerity in trying to please their customer makes the film all the more weird and funny. While the family in Visitor Q isn't necessarily isolated, I would still recommend it as it features a very dysfunctional family that is visited by a strange man who brings them together in a weird, perverse, and darkly funny way. He brings out the nurturer in the mother by getting her to lactate, and at one point the father has sex with a corpse, which undergoes rigor mortis, causing him to get stuck inside it, resulting in him seeking assistance from the whole family to get out. Do I really need to say any more? This is Takashi Miike at his weirdest and funniest. While I'm recommending Visitor Q, I might as well recommend its spiritual cousin, The Aroma, directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. This film, like Visitor Q, is about family visited by a stranger who changes their lives, but for the worse instead of for the better. In Feroma, the stranger fucks every member of the family, including the maid, and then leaves, which causes their lives to fall apart. Need I say more? This is a more artsy and slow movie than Visitor Q, which is much more colorful and random and bizarre, but it's definitely a very weird and entertaining movie. Like The Exterminating Angel, it's a deconstruction and criticism of the bourgeois way of life. Finally, if you haven't seen them already, some more great films about isolation, madness, and paranoia are The Shining, The Thing, and Alien. If you consider yourself a horror fan and you haven't seen those movies yet, get on that. Of course, not everyone is going to want to watch films that remind them about the sad state of the world we are in, so here's a quick list of recommendations for some weird, colorful movies that will distract you from the outside world. If you're looking for a good, weird, long Japanese movie, then Sion Sono's Love Exposure is the recommendation for you. It is overindulgent and nearly 4 hours long, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Another very weird Japanese movie is Takase Miike's Gozu. This movie is probably his weirdest, even by Miike standards, which says a lot. Hausu, or House, is another very strange Japanese movie. Extremely fun to watch with a lot of strange special effects. All of Alejandro Jodorowsky's movies are fantastic, especially The Holy Mountain, which may be one of the weirdest movies of all time. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a lot of fun. While I'm recommending Gilliam, I might as well recommend Brazil as well, which is a darkly funny dystopian nightmare. Maybe a Jim Carrey double feature will float your boat, with The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Speaking of Eternal Sunshine, which was written by Charlie Kaufman, check out all of his movies too, especially Being John Malkovich and Adaptation. If stop motion is your drug of choice, check out The Secret Adventures of Tom Thumb, as well as the films of Jan Swank-Meijzer, especially Alice, Little Otik, and Conspirators of Pleasure. For some 60s goodness, check out The Swimmer and The Graduate, two films I saw very recently and fell in love with. If you loved Parasite and you're looking for more Korean movies, check out Parasite director Bong Joon-ho's monster movie, The Host, and Park Chan-wook's brilliant Vengeance trilogy. Heck, check out all of their movies, they're all pretty damn good. For something more recent, check out The Lure, November, and Greener Grass. I talked about that last movie in my 2019 video, but I feel it deserves mentioning again. It's just an extremely weird and funny film. For some meta goodness, check out Snowflake, Holy Motors, and David Lynch's masterpiece, Mulholland Drive. Speaking of Lynch, if you need a TV series to binge, check out Twin Peaks. The second half of season 2 is hard to get through, but the finale, the prequel film, and the return series make it all worthwhile. Lars von Trier's Kingdom series is another deliciously weird television show that acts as a mixture of Twin Peaks with General Hospital. This is just barely scratching the surface, but hopefully this video gave you some ideas of what to watch during this quarantine. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe everyone,